Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our fourth entry into our 5-part educational census webinar series. Today's webinar is titled Implementing Your Campaign Through the Right Messenger, Mode, and Message. My name is Kevin Iaquinto. I'll be your moderator for today. We have another great presentation in store for you, and I want to thank you all in advance for attending and staying engaged with us throughout this entire series. The in-market census period is rapidly approaching, and we hope this webinar series has aided you in your preparation. A couple real fast tips on today's webinar. The attendees will be in listen-only mode. You can stream audio over your computer or through the dial-in number of your phone. We will be conducting a Q&A at the end of today's session. In your control panel on the right side, there will be a area for you to actually type in your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can as time allows. If you need technical support, there is a help tab in the GoToWebinar control panel. And if you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to email us at the email address you see on the screen. And for those of you joining us for the first time, just a quick recap of who Civis Analytics is. We are a data science, technology, and consulting company, and we work across the government, nonprofit, commercial, and political sectors to help our clients understand populations that they're trying to reach. We also empower them through our technology and expertise to create an environment of data-driven decision-making. And we do that with a unique blend of proprietary data, technology, and advisory services. Our team of data scientists, developers, and survey experts help organizations use statistical proof to guide decisions and stop guessing. So moving on to today's topic, as I said, this is webinar number 4 in our 5-part series. The 2020 census is something that we've invested heavily in here, and we feel that this is something that the country can't afford to screw up. So just by you being here, we want to thank you, and it reaffirms that what we're doing is the right thing. We appreciate your support and your effort to activate your communities towards achieving that complete and accurate count. So before I hand over to today's census experts, I want to share with you who will be speaking with you today. Their bios are on the screen, but you'll be hearing mostly from Anna Chen and Iñaki Sargazazu. You may also hear from Jonathan Williams and Ryan McGibney, who joined us in previous webinars during our Q&A section. Everyone has been instrumental in our 2020 census efforts, and we're looking forward to sharing some best practices with you today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Anna. Go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. So thank you all for joining us today. Let me see if I can get this working. So today I'm going to talk through just some best practices from commercial marketing that you may be able to use in your Get Out the Count efforts. In a lot of ways, reaching out to hard to count populations is analogous to marketing functions in commercial businesses. At its heart, you're building a plan to speak to your target audience in the commercial space that might be your customers or people that you think might be interested in your product. In Get Out the Count efforts, this is your hard to count population. But in both cases, what you want to do is deliver the message that will persuade your audience to take the desired action, whether that's buying something in the commercial space or filling out their census form and Get Out the Count. And also in both cases, you want to make sure you're making the best use of your available resources. And that includes any budget that you have, but also your time and energy and whatever partner resources you might have. And so the reason why I'm speaking with you today is that I do a lot of our marketing work with commercial and nonprofit organizations here at Civis. And so I wanted to share out the best practices of what we do with our clients on that front. Just to kick us off, often in marketing, we'll start with what we call a marketing brief. You can think of this as a souped up spreadsheet that really just lays out the game plan for your campaign. And this is particularly useful when you're working with different partners to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And so the idea behind this is to collect all of the information that you might need so that everyone has a point of reference and so that everyone has the information that they need. I added on the side just a few bullets of what you want to include here, but at a high level, you want to make sure everyone's aligned on the purpose of the campaign, as well as any specific goals that you're measuring, whether that's incremental dollars in sales, or whether it's a percentage of responses. The target audience here is also very important. So for Get Out the Count, we're looking at those hard to count populations, but we might want to add information here about certain different characteristics of that population in a specific location, whether that's demographics or age or where they live. Budget, obviously very important as well. This might also include how you're splitting this out into different phases of your campaign, or how you're allocating it across different tactics that you're using. Campaign strategy would be the bulk of what this document has. It's really all of the nitty-gritty details of how you're actually going to run your campaign, where your ads will be, and along with that, the deliverables that you might need from different partners, the timeline through which the planning all has to be done, when you'll be in market, as well as making note of the relevant stakeholders. So that is a lot of information, but if we boil it all down, it basically comes down to 3 questions: who you're talking to, what you're going to say to them, and how you're going to make sure that they see it. So as Kevin mentioned, we're in part 4 of the seminar series, and in the previous sessions and through previous planning, we already know who the who is and what the what is. So who specifically, we're looking at hard to count populations in a specific locale. So whether you're working in a city or in a county, we have some information on who those people might be. The what would be what we talked about in the last seminar, which is a proven message that we know will change the behavior of those hard to count populations and make it more likely for them to fill out their census forms. So our focus for today is really this last one, the how. And we can unpack that how into a lot of different components, including which marketing channels we want to use, how much we invest in each of those, and also just how do you use them. So before jumping into that, I wanted to take a quick break and just make sure we're on the same page with terminology, since I am using some marketing jargon here. So first off, marketing channels is really just the media through which your message can be communicated. So this might be TV ads, this might be digital banner ads that you see on the top of websites, this could be sponsored posts on Facebook, or this could be word of mouth and working through community organizations. Any of those would fall under this bucket. If that sounds like a lot, it is, and one way that we help organize that is kind of thinking through them in the different types that we have. So traditional channels, digital channels, and offline channels. Just to give you a bit of intuition as to what these each are. So traditional channels are generally what we might call mass media. So TV spots where they would show up on every TV screen for someone who's watching a football game or tuning into a certain sitcom. Same with radio ads, those would get broadcast to everyone who is listening to that particular station. Out of home includes billboards or bus shelters or subway ads, so anything that you might see on your commute. And then print generally includes newspapers and magazines and things of that nature. On the digital side, you can think of this as the banner ads that you might see on certain websites. Google is a big player here, the search results that the sponsored search results that you might see, as well as social media. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, all of that kind of falls under this digital bucket. And then lastly, offline channels. So this one, I will just say, looks a little bit different in commercial than it does in a Get Out the Count effort. So in commercial, this might take the form of a sponsored event where, for example, Budweiser might sponsor a pre-game rally for a football game, and in that way make sure that their brand is both associated with that event, but also is just a big part of that day when ideally a lot of people are having fun. It's possible that that might work out for a Get Out the Count effort too, but another thing that is used a little bit less in commercial but could be very, very helpful in Get Out the Count would be really using community organizations to reach out to people in a more grassroots fashion. So now that you're all experts on the different types of marketing channels, I also wanted to take a little time to talk through some terms that I might be using to describe a campaign. So first up is your target audience. This is very simply who you're trying to reach. Whether you can describe an actual list of people or whether you're describing them with different characteristics of that population, such as location or demographics. Creative is also a term that you might hear a lot. This is essentially what your audience sees, whether that's the video that then becomes a TV ad or the image that is shown on Facebook. All of those kind of can be referred to as creative. And then these last two terms, reach and frequency, are generally used to measure how well a campaign is doing. So reach is very simply how many people actually saw your ad or saw your message. And frequency is generally calculated on average, how many times each person saw your message. So now with that baseline, I'll talk a little bit more about the how of running a campaign. So if that all sounded a little overwhelming, it really can be. It's a very complicated question when you're looking at which marketing channels you should even consider using, what resources you might need available to use them effectively, how much each one might cost, as well as what investment you should be putting toward your marketing campaign. And then also, how do you even know it's working? If this sounds overwhelming, it can be, but the good news is that you're not alone. The Census Bureau is organizing a lot of efforts in those traditional channels like TV, radio, print, and out of home. So we're not going to focus a whole ton on this side of marketing, just because we know there's a lot of efforts happening at a national level. But at a high level, these channels are really effective because they have the broadest reach. So if you think about a TV ad on a nationally broadcast show, you're reaching everyone who sees that, who's tuned in for that day, regardless of where they are or who they are. That said, they can sometimes be used to target certain demographics. So you can imagine billboards or bus shelters or subways can be used to target people who live in certain areas or generally commute along certain routes. Radio and print are also very popular for reaching older populations, since they do tend to listen to the radio or read newspapers or magazines in print. However, on the other side, these channels are often the most expensive and also the most complicated to run. So to give you some intuition around that, so if you think about getting a full page print ad in a newspaper, that might cost on the order of $100,000. And a single spot on TV, which would be 30 seconds of airtime, will cost about $30,000. And generally you wouldn't just buy one. And along with that expense and that complication, often a lot of these channels are purchased through media agencies, which are companies that are experts at putting messages out into certain places and help you organize all of that. But those are often like very large relationships that a local government or a local organization may not have. And so it's very good to know that the Census Bureau is handling a lot of this. That said, mass media campaigns through those traditional channels aren't enough. There's a lot of marketing research to show that multi-channel campaigns, which means you're using not just one or two channels, but you're using everything at your disposal, are generally the most successful. And the reason why they are is that they're really maximizing that reach and frequency that we talked about earlier. Because different media channels can reach different audiences, you're actually able to find different people by putting out an Instagram post than you might by putting an ad in the New York Times, for example. And the other piece of it as well is that you can reinforce the message that you're sending by having it in multiple channels. So even for someone who does see an ad on TV and sees a banner ad on a website, it really helps persuade them to change their behavior because they've seen that message in multiple places. And so really where local governments and organizations can help in the Get Out the Count effort is through these more targeted channels. through digital and through offline messaging, where you have a much better idea of who these people are and can make a very targeted campaign. So the rest of our presentation is going to focus on those targeted channels and really how local organizations can help with the get out the count effort and reach those hard to count populations. I'm going to go through digital first. So at a high level, digital marketing is a lot more accessible than the traditional channels may be because it's cheaper, more manageable, and also more measurable. The two big players in this space in the US are Google and Facebook, although Amazon is quickly approaching. But as of 2019, Google and Facebook combined account for 60% of all digital ads sold. And the good news is that they've set up a very simple system for those who, for whom the traditional channels might be out of reach. A digital campaign is not. Part of that is because of the rates. So Google, for example, could have rates as low as $1 per click, and so in their search terms. So you pay $1 for each person who clicks, but that also includes anyone who might have seen it and any residual benefits you have from that, even if they didn't click. They've also developed really helpful online tools, which I'll talk through in a little bit, that help guide you through the process of setting up a campaign and provide helpful tips on how to make your campaign effective. And the last piece that they also offer is standardized reporting. So because everything is digital, they're able to provide a closed loop and show you, for example, these are the number of people who clicked through on your ad and then visited your website, or who then maybe searched a similar search term afterward. So I wanted to spend the next couple minutes kind of talking through a quick overview of Google and Facebook and what their advertising capabilities look like. There are many resources online to actually run these campaigns and guides on each of the different steps. And so for this section, just wanted to talk through quickly what those look like and what you're able to do. So Google Ads I'll talk through first. On the left, I put in a couple screenshots of what the campaign setup looks like. But at a high level, what you're able to do with Google Ads is actually put out your message into two different networks. Google's search network, which includes anything that includes a search bar, essentially. So Google search or shopping or images. And then on the other side, also their Google Display Network, which includes the videos that you see before YouTube videos play, or the little banner ads that you see in your Gmail. Some benefits of Google Ads. So obviously they've got this interface that helps kind of walk you through each step of your campaign planning process. But they also can have options that don't require you to create any new content. So you don't need to have a whole design firm creating videos for you. You could write something very simple that then points someone to a web page you might already have, for example. So you can get very strong returns with little investment right from the get-go. The other thing you're able to do with Google is target locations. So whether you want to do that by state or by zip code, those are both possible. And you can also add some flexibility just kind of built into how people can engage with your message, whether you want them to give you their cell phone number so that you can send them a text, or if you want them to visit a web page, you have different options there. Similarly, Facebook's ad manager has a very similar setup to kind of walk you through the different steps of setting up a campaign. Some key features on the Facebook side, they have, I believe it's 7 different options for what your campaign objective might be. And so as you move through different phases of the in-market, whether you're more in the awareness phase and want to set up a brand awareness or reach campaign to reach as many people as possible and make sure they know that the census is happening, or whether you're more in the reporting campaign, you might want to use something like a lead generation where you can help collect some information from people to then set reminders for them to fill out their forms. Or there are a few other options as well, depending on what might be the best fit. Similarly to Google, you're able to target audiences with location, for example, zip code. There's also an option to basically drop a pin and pick a radius around it. But you can also filter by languages that people speak, different behaviors that they might have, or if you do happen to have a target list of with personal information, you can load that into Facebook as well. One thing I did want to mention here, so Facebook changed their policy so that you can't filter or target by race. But one thing that we found in our previous work is because zip codes are highly correlated with race and also languages as well, you're able to find some of those target people that you're looking for that might be hard to count. Even if you would otherwise describe them by race or ethnicity, you can kind of use zip code to reach them digitally as well. And the other thing that Facebook also provides is recommendations on how to set up your images based on your campaign type. So they'll provide some guidelines. For example, the title should be no longer than 25 characters, or the image that you provide should be no more than 30% text. And so different guidelines to help make sure that your campaign is as effective as possible and that people actually look at your content. That said, we know that get out the count efforts do differ from commercial marketing. And in particular, I think the main distinction is that in commercial marketing, you kind of take what you get. You know that you won't be able to reach everyone. And there's no real emphasis on measuring how many people you failed to reach. You just want to make sure you're generating more revenue or more sales or more awareness. It doesn't necessarily matter if you got to everyone. Whereas on the other hand, for Census get out the count efforts, the whole point is to reach everyone, and in particular to reach those hard to count populations. And so in this sense, with Census, you can kind of think of digital and traditional marketing channels as kind of that low-hanging fruit where there is a pretty established infrastructure around that already. But the offline messaging that you would do would be really critical for your success and is a tool in your get out the count tool belt that is not as often used in commercial marketing. So with that, I'm gonna turn this over to Iñaki now, who's actually gonna dig into those other tactics that you can use offline to really reach those hard to count populations.
Thank you, Anna, for that. As Anna mentioned, I'm going to be talking about how to reach out people offline. And to start, we first want to sort of take back and look at what the Census Bureau has identified as those less likely to fill out the census, right? Using the census barriers, attitudes, and motivation study, we know that those hard to count populations have several characteristics. For instance, they're young. On average, they're 39 and under. We know that these are people with low income, who are highly mobile and either live in rental places or do not live in traditional housing and live in things such as mobile homes. These people are also very diverse, with inclusive of racial and ethnic minorities, non-English speakers, or undocumented immigrants. And also, this is a group that is less educated. It also includes people that are homeless or that have disabilities. Besides these characteristics, we also know that those hard to count are also less likely to be online. So, for instance, from the CVEMs, we know that those not likely to fill the census, which would be the yellow bar in this graph, are less likely to use the internet, right, and less frequent to use the internet than those that are likely to fill the census, which is the blue bar in this graph. And that gap can amount to days of usage, right? So, for instance, the average person that is likely to fill out the census will connect to the internet and use the internet several times a day, while the person that is not likely to fill out the census on average connects to the internet and uses the internet just once a day or less. On top of that, we know that 20% of households lack internet access, but this figure is around 40% for households with incomes with less than 25%, and for those with limited English. So there is a significant online digital barrier to those that are harder to count. We can look at this by different characteristics and explore this a little bit further to understand these communities. And so, for instance, if we look at race, we can see that, again, the same pattern exists, where most racial groups, those that are not likely to fill out the census, are less frequently using the internet than those who are likely. Some communities differ. So, for instance, the Asian community is one where the difference between those that are likely and not likely to complete the census is smaller than in other communities, such as the African American. In this case, for instance, in the African American community, we know that on average, a member of this community that is not likely to fill out the census connects to the internet only a few times a week in comparison with the other racial groups who connect to the internet more frequently. Well, there might not be a lot of differences in terms of racial groups. In terms of age, we see a different pattern. And one that it's worth noticing in terms of the strategies that we choose. So for those under 35, we can see that there's not really a gap between those who are likely and not likely to fill out the census. This would indicate, for instance, that strategies such as the online strategy that Anna was talking before might be useful to reach the hard to count in this group. However, as age increases, we start noticing that first, there's less frequent usage of the internet, but second, that the gap between those that are likely to fill out the census and those who are not likely to fill out the census, right? So the gap between the blue and the yellow dots increases. So, so in this case, we can notice that for this group of older adults, strategies that are offline will probably be more effective than strategies that are online. So in general, what we can gather from these insights from the CBAN study is that there is a real need for a multi-channel campaign to be able to reach to all these different groups. So if we want to reach people through traditional, if we can't reach people through traditional or social media, then how do we do it? Well, I'm gonna take the framework that Anna spoke to before and talk about this in the offline part. So again, we want to identify those who we're targeting, right? So who is most likely to be offline? We want to identify the message, and then we want to identify how we reach these people, right? One of the key aspects of why this is so important in the offline area is because reaching out in person is much expensive than reaching out through other means, right? So for instance, while a cost per click can be $1, a cost for outreach in person can vary from $2 to $75. A study by the Fiscal Policy Institute identified that a basic outreach strategy costs on average about $2. And this would consist of organizing public forums, for instance, while an intensive campaign that consists of in-person contacts and include in-language discussions for households that do not speak English could amount to about $75 per person reached. So as we see, there can be a significant cost to these strategies, and by following this methodology, we can try to be more precise in who we identify, have the right message, and choose the better strategies. In order to identify the hard to count populations, we've shown this in a previous webinar, and you can refer back to it if you want to see it more. But just in general, we want to be able to use a tool that will allow us to identify where the population is that is hard to count, and what are the characteristics of this population. There's the Civics Intelligence Center is a tool that we built here at Civis, but there's also other tools that are available free to use. Second, in terms of determining the message, we've also touched on this issue in the previous webinar, but just as a refresher, in order to, we want to determine the right message for the different communities that we approach. And the message that motivates one group might not motivate another, or might not motivate the other groups with the same strength. So we really want to be able to understand what are these differences and what is the right message for the community that we're interested with. Remembering that some messages motivate and some messages can have a significant backlash. In terms of the how do we reach people offline? Each community that we target will be unique, and each will require a different composition of messengers, organizations, and events. In some cases, the trusted messengers will be the same as the trusted organizations, such as schools, for instance. In other cases, the trusted messengers will hold events at the trusted organizations, like, for instance, sending an elected official to a community center. So knowing who these trusted messengers are, who these trusted organizations are, can help you figure out what are the appropriate events of your offline strategy. Trusted messengers are those people, basically, to know who the trusted messengers are, we follow the maxim, we trust the people that we know, right? These are people that know their community, right? And know its challenges. These are people that can communicate in linguistic and culturally appropriate ways to the members of a community. And because of this, they can speak about the census and they can educate others on it. Trusted messengers are also going to be sources of knowledge of who the trusted organizations in the community are. And as such, they play a key role in this outreach effort. As I said before, some trusted members of the community are also going to be trusted organizations. However, this is not always the case. Trusted organizations in general refer to the places where the members of a community engage with and participate of. For example, knowing the places where people live, for instance, can be useful in knowing what type of activities to target. Whether people live in single homes or in rental communities can be informative in terms of how we approach them. We can approach through door knocking, or we can approach through an event at the rental community. Similarly, schools where kids attend is important information, so that because they can provide information to parents through their kids, or they can organize events of their own to help inform the parents of the community about the census. Churches or other places where people socialize can provide accurate information about the census and its importance. And finally, the businesses where people shop and where they engage with can also be places where information is provided. And this can be reached through either local chambers of commerce or, as I mentioned, through trusted community members. Overall, knowing these places can be useful in creating activities and informational opportunities around those hard to count. In terms of the strategies for reaching out people, Let me talk about two in particular that will be used to get out the count and are being used already in some cases. The first of these is canvassing. Canvassing is a tried and tested way of getting out the vote or selling, right? Going door to door can help get out the count as well because of its success in other realms. It does have some pros and cons that we should be aware of. For instance, trusted messengers in a canvassing operation can be useful to explain the importance of the census and assuage doubts of those they talk to. In contrast to other media, such as traditional media or social media, face-to-face interaction has the strongest recall effect, which means that people that are approached in this manner remember more the details of the conversation that they had. Finally, it's easier to track and to confirm that you talked to the right people compared to traditional or digital channels. So you can keep a track and you can keep a record of where you've been, who you talked to, and whether you think you convinced those people to get out the count. Some of the negative aspects of it, or some of the cons of canvassing, is that they require a big team, right? A good ground game operation aimed at finding the hard to count will require a very large number of people. The good thing is that we have a lot of time for it, right? From the time that the awareness periods begin to the time that the self-reporting period ends, there's a significant amount of time. That is different to probably the fast-paced nature of an election, where in one day or in a couple of weeks, you're trying to get out the vote. It is also a strategy that is time-consuming, right? And it's time-consuming because having real and meaningful conversations that are memorable in every door that it's canvassed can take time. And because of this, sometimes campaigns just sacrifice the quality of conversations in order to increase the number of doors knocked. So a campaign can just focus on the numbers and not focusing on the quality, and as such, that would damage the effectiveness of this campaign. Another strategy would be to organize community events. Community events can be held at parks or other open spaces, and these can provide opportunities for members of the community to meet those trusted voices that were identified earlier, and to participate in activities around the census. These events can be solely census related, or they can also be done as part of other types of events like local sports games, block parties, or others. Community events can be used for two different purposes. During the awareness period, for instance, these can be used for information. So information booths can provide a place for people to gather information about the census, to be knowledgeable about it. During the reporting period, in these events, the stations can be installed for people to be able to fill out the census in order to get out the count. As we have seen, there's many efforts that we can take in order to get out the count. We can learn, and we should learn, from commercial marketing best practices and utilize community resources so that everybody gets counted. We have seen how, because of the nature of those hard to count, and because we're trying to get everybody counted, we'll need multi-channel campaigns. And such, we can build on the foundation of the Census Bureau's mass media campaign with digital and offline tactics to get out the count. In terms of digital tools, we've seen how there are tools available from digital advertisers like Google and Facebook to run effective campaigns that reach target audiences online. And in terms of online reaching, we have seen how we can leverage relationships with existing community organizations and trusted leaders to find those that can speak to hard to count populations in the places where they're at. At the end of the day, as we have seen in this webinar, in order to know the who, the what, and the how of implementing your campaign, data is essential to inform all of these tactics. Thank you all for your attendance at this webinar, and now I'm going to hand control over to Kevin.
All right, Inaki and Anna, thank you very much for the insightful comment. I think there's some really great stuff and actionable stuff in there. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and open the floor to questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And remember, the audience, you're in listen-only mode. So if you do have a question, make sure you are answering it or asking it in the control panel for the GoToWebinar platform. So the first question that we have is, do you have any guidelines for choosing digital platforms based on budget? And actually, I'll do my best to answer that one from a marketing perspective. Up to this point, you've done a lot of research, right? So you understand your audience very well. Ideally, you would have some insight into where your audience is online. For example, if you have data and research that shows that your particular audience is very active on Facebook, you're going to want to make sure you have a presence there. Likewise, the other social media channels and Google and search. But in the interest and spirit of using data to drive a lot of the decisions, one of the best practices that we use in the marketing space is to actually test and learn your way in. So one of the great things about the digital channels is that there's a very low cost to entry, and you do get immediate feedback, which you can align to your key KPIs. So an example that you might want to spread your budget, an initial budget, very small amount of budget into each of the digital channels, and run the test for a week or two or whatever your timeline might be, then look at the results, determine then what's working for you and what isn't, and then reallocate your budget accordingly. So the test and learn approach and basing your budgeting decisions and allocations off data is typically a best practice when choosing digital channels and digital platforms. So the next question, how do we know if the campaign is working?
I'm happy to take this one. So I think this is a problem that often comes up not only with get out the count efforts, but also with commercial marketing and nonprofit marketing as well, where the outcome that you're looking for, in this case, people filling out and returning their census forms, might be pretty far in the future. And we don't know necessarily, we don't have any numbers on what the rates look like just yet. Often what we do in this case is we look at what we tend to call mid-funnel metrics, or sometimes upper funnel metrics, where basically there are steps along the way where you can gauge people's interest and engagement. So for example, if you're running a campaign for people to sign up for text message reminders about the census, you can look at that as a proxy for engagement and likelihood to then fill out the census. Other things you might look at are just number of clicks on a digital ad, for example, or any other sort of engagement metrics you might have to get a sense of whether or not people are looking at your content and interacting with it in any way.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Our next question is regarding testing messages and actually designing ads. So the question is, in the past we've talked about testing messages, but can you help us with designing ads?
That's a good question too. I think that's a problem that a lot of organizations will have, where they don't necessarily have design skills in-house and might be looking for partners to do that work. One thing I just wanted to plug is that part of the reason why I discussed the marketing brief and mentioned the different parts of that is that having that document is a really great way to make sure that any partners you have are aligned with what your goals are. And so it's very laid out for them what the purpose of the campaign is, what you're trying to drive, and what kind of actions you want people to take, as well as the timeline that you're on, so that everyone can be on the same page, and the ads that they do design for you will line up with what you're hoping to see.
This is Jonathan Williams. I thought I would chime in. I agree with everything that Anna said there. But I'm also thinking of some of the earlier content we ran in this webinar series. Ideally, this census outreach effort is a journey that started with survey research was our recommendation. Survey research that will allow you to understand the blockers or the motivators of your populations of interest. And when it's approached in that sort of end-to-end fashion, it's our hope that themes that are likely to be successful or themes that you know that you should avoid should already have been surfaced through prior research.
All right, thanks, Jonathan and Anna. So it doesn't look like there's any other questions in the queue. So well, again, I want to thank everybody for attending today. And our fifth and final webinar will take place in January. Likely the date is TBD right now, but everyone will be notified via email once we solidify that date. It's kind of a moving target because we want to make sure that we talk about in-campaign optimization. So we want to make sure that there's enough of your census efforts that are actually in market at the time to give you some valuable insights. So you will be hearing from us relatively shortly over the next few weeks as we nail down that date. But I think it'll be a very interesting topic that kind of brings everything we've talked about so far together in an actionable way, and you can actually see the progress you're making. So with that, I'd like to thank Anna and Inaki for a great presentation today, and thanks for the content you've shared and best practices. For more information about Civis in general or Census Intelligence Center, please visit our website and to our Census Intelligence page, or reach out to us directly through our Contact Us form on the website. Remember, this webinar was recorded, so you can go back and watch it again if there's anything you missed, or if you wanted to refresh any of the previous webinars. We have created a playlist on our YouTube channel, so you'll have all these webinars kind of ready, queued up back to back if you need to access them. Again, thank you again for your time. And speakers, thank you for your time. We hope you have a great rest of your week, and good luck with the census effort.